We're just about at noon, and I'm just going to go ahead and introduce. We have the pleasure of having Amy Lewis present from HydroAnalytics. She presented this apparently to the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission staff, and this is on a project that is near and dear to my heart, resiliency of public water systems to climate change. And so it's noon now, and I would like to just go ahead and turn this over to Amy because I don't want to take up a second of her time. Amy, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Jerry, and thank you all for coming. I'm excited to tell you about this work. We started in 2021, and it was to support the 50-year water plan, and it was done in collaboration with many state agencies, and water utility directors and public meetings. So this wasn't all my invention. It was a work that evolved over many meetings. So we identified our vulnerabilities to the projected climate changes and assessed how to create a more resilient future. While we looked at all water use sectors in this work, the focus of this presentation is just on public water systems, how we can assess their vulnerability and improve their resilience to climate change. So, but before I describe the resilience assessment, I just want to take a minute to summarize the first part of the 50-year water plan, which was to determine how we are going to be impacted by climate change. So in 2021, ISC reached out to the Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources and convened a team of scientists to capture the latest climate change research and what it foretells for New Mexico. If we were in person, I could look at you all in the room and ask if you're familiar with this, so I would spare you the details, but I'll just give a quick summary in case some of you aren't familiar with this report. And it's available on the geoinfo, newmexicotech.edu. It's Bulletin 164, so you can download that. But the take-home message is that temperatures and aridity will be higher, water supply will be reduced, precipitation will fall more as rain than snow, and what does fall as snow will melt much earlier. Forest fires will increase with subsequent debris flows. Degraded soils will increase. Erosion and surface water quality will be reduced. Kind of a Armageddon picture. This is depressing stuff, so just a warning. But one of the criticisms of our 2018 water plan that we did for ISC is that we didn't address climate change in a meaningful way. The Leap Ahead report gives us this information that we need about the future demand and supply, both of which will be impacted by increasing temperatures. So here are two graphs that are pulled directly out of that report. The average annual temperatures will climb and precipitation will remain the same with longer periods of drought. The northwest part of the state will see the highest increase in temperatures. So overall, about 5 degrees can be expected statewide. All sectors of water use are impacted: agricultural systems, public water systems, industrial, commercial, mining, power, watersheds and habitat, recreation, quality of life. And again, so I'm just going to talk about the public water systems. And in New Mexico, we have about 600 public water systems that serve from anywhere from 25 to 700,000 customers. So, and this is also work I did in 2020 for the OSC. We mapped all the water service areas for the majority of the large public water systems. I think we got 96% of the water system service area boundary for them. We got locations for all of them. And then this project wasn't possible without the support of the Drinking Water Bureau, NMED, their database, and then their input on both the mapping of the water systems and this resilience assessment. So step one in figuring out how to be resilient to climate change is to understand your vulnerability. How is warming temperatures, how is that going to affect you? Warmer temperatures are increase the consumptive irrigation requirement for landscapes, and they're going to increase the growing season. What is reduced runoff and recharge going to do is going to diminish the water supplies available. Earlier snowmelt will impact systems that divert surface water, particularly those that have insufficient storage capacity. And if it's all running off in March and it used to run off over a 3-month period, that impacts how they manage their water supply. Prolonged droughts are going to stress all water supplies and increase demand. The increased frequency of fires and the degradation of soils will increase the risk of debris flows, high peak flows, and erosion can damage infrastructure. First of all, the first little chunk I'm going to talk about for the next few slides is how is demand going to change? So we looked at, with no change in annual precipitation or monthly precipitation, we just looked at across the board 5-degree increase in monthly temperatures. And we looked at several locations in the state. So Julie Valdez with OSC's Water Use and Conservation Bureau ran the Blaney-Criddle and the modified Blaney-Criddle models to evaluate with the same monthly precipitation, but a 5-degree, well, we ran both, used the average temperature and precipitation from 1981 to 2010, then ran the models again for a 5-degree increase in temperature. So only this temperature increase. And what did that do to demand? Well, we looked at turf and fruit trees. For the agricultural sector, we looked at alfalfa and I think pecans or something. But this, for public water systems, we just looked at irrigating turf and then fruit trees. And the increase ranges from 15% to 26% for turf. And for fruit trees, 17 to 30%. So depending on where you live, like Taos, their water demand is going to go up the most compared to some of the other ones. And that growing season is going to increase by 34 to 35 days. So that's significant. That's a stress just on its own, even if supply doesn't change. But other changes in water demand, you know, we looked at swamp coolers, but they use about 20 gallons per day in Las Cruces per person. And with a 5-degree increase, you know, you would think swamp coolers will be used more, but also humidity is going to go down. So the swamp coolers will be more effective. So maybe the water demand from swamp coolers isn't going to go up as much. And we talked a lot about swimming pools, but so many regions require that swimming pools be covered. So it wasn't thought to be a big change in demand on public water systems. So the next piece now, we're going to look at the supply. And we talked to folks, the public water system directors, NMED, you know, how are these systems going to be impacted by all these climate shocks? And the answers came back. They kind of lumped into 5 different categories. First, there's water diversity, water availability, infrastructure capacity, watershed health, and demand management. So I'm going to go through each of these. You know, some of them are quantifiable. So I'm going to show you maps of those that we could quantify. And then there's some that are not, we just don't have the data to, we don't have the details to assess it right now. So the first and maybe the most important factor that increases resilience is water diversity. If you have multiple sources of supply, you're going to increase your resilience. You can rely on surface water in a wet year, rest the aquifer, let it recover during dry periods. And, you know, this has been done by Santa Fe and Albuquerque. They've been working this problem for a couple of decades. So here's a map of water diversity in New Mexico of public water systems. The let's see. So this shows the light blue. Those are that are solely dependent on groundwater. The magenta, those are solely dependent on surface water. And then somewhere in between, those that are diverse have a mix of supplies. They've got groundwater and surface water. So Albuquerque is showing up here in this big blue blob in the middle in Bernalillo County. And then Santa Fe is in the middle of Santa Fe County. And this is Farmington, San Juan Basin area. So if we ranked them, you know, had diversity levels, this is just another way to look at it. The most resilient is bright blue. You're going to see this color coding throughout all the pictures, all the maps. And then red is less vulnerable for this factor. So that looks pretty bleak. 95% of the systems are relying on one supply. But if we look at the total volume, so 575 have just are very not very resilient for this factor. But if we looked at the total volume of water diverted, about 38% comes from very resilient systems. So we've got Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Farmington. You know, these are bigger cities that have a diverse water supply. So it's not quite as bleak as that earlier map when you think about the water volume diverted. And then same, we can look at population. 42% of the population in New Mexico is served by resilient water systems. And this number can also change in the future when Clovis and those communities in eastern New Mexico get their pipeline to hook up to the Ute Reservoir. Okay, next factor is water availability. So you might only have surface water, but you might have a very big river, like the San Juan River going by, so you're not as vulnerable if you have a small stream. We looked at the groundwater supply, the projected supply-demand gap. So I'm going to talk about those three. Other maybe even more important is the aquifer thickness compared to the well depth, the water rights, ESA, compact issues. These things weren't easily mappable, but they're still just as important.
Amy, this is Jerry. In that, did you also look at the age of their well?
No, we didn't. That's a good idea. Do we have that data?
Yep.
I'm going to just write that down. That's a great, no one ever brought that up. I like that. And you have that in the water rights? Well, we'll talk about that later. That's great. Okay, so I'm just going to explain what I did to look at surface water supply availability. I mapped all the stream gauges in the state and looked at their minimum flow ever. And these are for gauges that had a minimum of 10 years of record, at least. And then compared the minimum flow to their actual diversion. So I divided the that minimum stream flow ever recorded against the diversion to see how vulnerable they are. So up in Farmington, the minimum flow ever recorded is like 50 times what they divert. They're not as vulnerable as some of these systems that are up in the mountains where the minimum flow has been less than what they need in that year. It's very simplistic, but it was just one way to look at this surface supply and whether it's available. The next piece, okay, it's groundwater. Ideally, we could run a numerical model and simulate the sustainability of each aquifer and each well and determine the potential to continue pumping into the future. Without that information, we have attempted to capture the type of aquifer, whether it is in a mine basin or a stream-connected basin. In stream-connected basins, the OSC has managed water rights to keep the river whole, whereas in mine basins, the aquifer is managed with the intent of depleting the resources over a specific time. So in some areas, even in stream-connected basins, the aquifer is declining. DBSNA, as part of a regional water planning effort, looked at the rate of water level declines in the state, and they came up with these areas that are more resilient than others. So we're in eastern New Mexico, that's the High Plains Aquifer. We know it's declining. There are lots of reports about how much time's left, maybe only 5 years around Clovis. And then there's the Estancia Basin, the Mimbres Basin. These are aquifers that there's no stream flowing out of them. They don't there's more pumping than recharge. And then even like this is, I think, the Blue Water Basin. There's still a lot of water level declines. It's not getting recharged as well. So those water systems that are located in these areas with less sustainable aquifer were ranked lower than those that are plotted blue in a stream-connected aquifer. Some systems like Silver City and Carlsbad get water out of both mined and stream-connected basins. Carlsbad gets water from Lee County, and then Silver City gets water from the Mimbres Basin and the Gila.
There is a quick question in the chat. Helen asked, did you look at the demand of riparian trees / habitat? It seems that the acreage of trees has increased. Was that I think that was in reference to the surface water supplies.
Nope, I'm just looking at public water systems, and then that was just stream gauges. minimum stream flow versus what the water system diverted. I didn't look at all the demands on the system, only what that particular water system needed. So, but because a lot of people in these meetings said, well, what you need to look at the overall stress on the water system. And maybe that gets to Helen's question. We don't have, what we worked with the regional water planning are the water use categories that the OSC reports every 5 years, which is irrigated agriculture, reservoir evaporation, the public water systems, domestic wells, etc. They don't quantify riparian demand. So will answer your question. But to try to look at least the human water diversions and reservoir evaporation in the different regions, this is what came out of the 2018 state water plan with all the work that DBSNA did in projecting the supply demand gap for the different regions. We pulled it all together into a state water plan. And this is what it looks like. I don't know if you can read these numbers, but in the Northeast, New Mexico, the gap, so this is in a drought year with a high demand projection, it's almost 500,000 acre feet shortfall by 2060. But all regions have a gap. And so we just looked at this to try to capture the overall stress on the system and how they might be vulnerable in the future. Here's another way of looking at it. It's the demand gap as a percent of the demand by the region during a drought. So even Mora County, which doesn't have a huge amount of demand, in a drought, they would only have 10% of their supply. And the Northeast, 12%, 14% for Colfax County, 17% on the Rio Chama, because these are the Mora and Rio Chama are all surface water dependent, so they're really, really vulnerable to drought. So we took this number and then color-coded or ranked the different public systems based on where they fell within the regions on their percentage of demand to supply. And that was another way to capture it. Ideally, we'd have a numerical model and we could simulate all of these, the demand into the future, and ideally we metered everything so we knew exactly how much was being pumped and then how long the aquifer is going to last. This is in lieu of that. This is what we thought we could do with available data. Okay, so looking at the overall level of resilience for water availability, many systems are tapping into a more resilient stream-connected aquifer, but it looks bleak for a lot of those that are in that demands. When we consider the demand of each region, the 427 water systems are in a least resilient category for when we look at the water demand. And again, we really need a coupled stream aquifer model to better assess these demands. Okay, so the next category is the resilience factor of infrastructure. So we looked at the number of wells serving a water system, the capacity to store and treat water, the emergency supply, frequency of water resource monitoring by a public water system, raw water storage, equity, the managerial level of compliance with NMED, Drinking Water Bureau standards. And then the other thing not quantifiable with available data was the condition of the infrastructure. So I think, Jerry, that gets to the age of the well. And then do they have an emergency power supply? Because that could, I think they're talking about problems with power supply with climate change. It's not directly a water problem, but if it could affect the water utilities. So I'll try to power through this. The infrastructure pieces, these are the number of wells each water system has. 50% have only one well. 81, okay, so but you might only have one well, but if you've got a couple of weeks storage capacity, you're not as vulnerable as if you have, 3 hours of storage capacity. The bigger cities, of course, can't store even a day's worth of supply because they're serving 700,000 people, but they also have more than 100 wells. They have a lot more backup supply, so they're not as vulnerable to this piece. Only 50% of the systems had an emergency supply, and this is based on a Drinking Water Bureau survey they did in August 2021. And we looked at are they paying attention to their water supply? Do they have snowmelt gauges? Are they measuring the water level in their wells? And I was really surprised that 70% are measuring fewer than once per year. And so you could end up being caught flat-footed if you're not paying attention to that. Your water level is getting low in your well. If you can anticipate these changes, you can apply to drill a new well or find another source, another backup supply. So then for those systems that are diverting surface water, I looked at whether they had storage capacity or not. And this is looking at the OSC's Dam Safety Bureau, their database, and where dams are. And some of these small systems up in the mountains don't have any raw water storage. So they'd be really vulnerable to earlier runoff with the projected climate change, with runoff occurring much earlier.
Amy, this is Jerry again, this reservoir storage, but what about USR, underground storage?
Well, at the time I did this, there weren't any public water systems that have underground storage. But that is something that could, I guess, what you're saying could help. But write these down. This is good to talk about. I like it. Okay, so then the next piece that we're trying to capture, and a lot of this is from input from the public and water utility folks, is like, well, how, some systems have volunteers or they have no paid staff. They just, on the weekend have to try to fix the well or the leaky pipe or whatever. So how do we capture that managerial level? We didn't have a database that said, they've got 3 paid staff or they have volunteer staff. So as a proxy to managerial level, we looked at whether they're meeting the Bureau, the Drinking Water Bureau's requirements for testing well, as required by the Safe Drinking Water Act, that they have to routinely test their water supplies and send in reports about the water quality. If they are violating water quality standards or don't submit their report, that's a violation. So some of these violations are health-based and some are just they didn't submit the report. So we don't know, they might have a health violation. That's why they didn't submit the report. So I just used it all together. Total violations between June 20th and June 2021. There's, let's see, 38% that are serving a population of 375, or 18% of the population currently have reported at least one violation in drinking water standards. So that's kind of reflects the managerial level. And then infrastructure capacity, we wanted to think about equity and, well, wealthier systems can address these problems, and those that are more vulnerable don't have the funding to drill another well or build a storage tank. They are more vulnerable to climate change. So where are those communities? And as a proxy, we use the median household income. So using the census tracts and intersecting with the water service area and GIS, we got the mean household income of the different systems, and it's just a reflection of their ability to maintain their system. So you can see 60% have a mean household income that is less than 90% of the median. So they would be more vulnerable. Those in orange to red. Okay, so this is hard to take all in, all these different numbers and factors. For infrastructure capacity, I just kind of tried to lump them all together and come up with an infrastructure capacity score, if you will. I looked at all of these 6 or 7 factors and put them together in a matrix and weighted them differently, whether they had the treated water storage and number of wells, those kind of go together. We'll take the highest score from those, look at whether they're monitoring water levels, have raw water storage, et cetera, and then ranked those. This is arbitrary, it could be modified, changed. But then I looked at like the overall score, and it's kind of, most of them have a really low resilience for their infrastructure strength, 440 out of 604. And then, I looked at, well, is it just the small systems that are vulnerable because they don't have the resources? And this is a plot. The R-square is 0.11. It's pretty small. It's not really a big trend. I took Albuquerque off of this because it skews the whole thing. It just shows no trend. You can have a small system that is has a very well maintained infrastructure, and then some small systems rank very low on it. So that it's not a clear correlation there. I was thinking, well, this would be a reason to get like all 7 systems and placitas to group together and be one system. They could share resources and staff, et cetera. So, okay, so that's the infrastructure piece. The next piece is watershed health. And we looked at the soil condition and erosion risk, the debris flow risk, and other thing that wasn't readily quantifiable with existing data was infrastructure vulnerability. Although, what would be good is to have exactly the well location or their storage tank, where it is within the floodplain. That infrastructure information and Drinking Water Bureau, not all of it is accurate. So maybe that's been improved, but I've worked a lot on trying to fix that, but that we don't have that, or at least I don't have that at my fingertips to feel. I think I could evaluate that confidently. So then in 2020, the New Mexico State Forest produced an action plan. It's a beautiful report. I recommend you looking at it. There's a lot of great information. And I'm using 2 of their GIS files. One is the erosivity index. And they looked at the K factor and the slope and the type of soil. And this is a map of the darker areas. There's a much greater severe risk of erosion. Just not even talking about fire, just an intense storm event. Where is the risk of erosion? And then I overlap that with where our public water systems are. In 23% are in areas of severe or very severe risk of erosion. So it's kind of hard to see the red ones because some of those are so tiny. Their service area is tiny, but and every place has a slight risk at least. And then we looked at the Forest Action Plan's map of the post-fire erosion hazard. So this has to do with a debris flow. These are the areas that have a forest, it get burned, there could be a massive debris flow that occurs. And if you don't know what that looks like, just Google the one Cochiti Reservoir, or Cochiti after the I think it was the Las Conchas fire. There's a great video Phoebe Suena took of it coming down the creek that wiped out the Dixon Orchard. And there's some for Santa Clara Creek too. It really gives you a visual of how severe this problem could be. So I overlapped the service areas with the debris flow risk, and there are 25% of systems are in an area of severe risk. So, okay, this is just a summary of the systems. most are resilient to the debris flow risk, and then quite a few are potentially vulnerable to erosion or a debris flow risk. The last factor then is the demand management. So we looked at whether you have a conservation plan, and we looked at landscape watering patterns, and those that it's not easy to quantify is whether there's been water hardening already occurred, and how many of these public water systems participate in sharing agreements. So they have a system in place. If there is a drought, they already know who gets what, and it doesn't have to be hashed out during the crisis. And this last factor kind of ties in together with the first piece I talked about with increased water demand with climate change. So the systems that, and then again, this is the Drinking Water Bureau. They did a survey in August 2021. They called all the public water systems and asked, do you have a conservation plan? And this is a map showing those that did not, the red in red, they did not have a conservation plan at all, or they wouldn't respond to the survey. And those with an enforceable plan, which is 45% of them, they have a plan, and they're less vulnerable because they have already tuned the community into the fact that this is New Mexico with a limited supply. Regardless of climate change, we have droughts and we need to be prepared for them. So those communities that have educated their customers to this issue are less vulnerable than those that have not. And then the next piece is we looked at the per capita water demand. And so this is based on the OSC's Water Use by Categories report for 2015. And those in red have show more than 200 gallons per capita per day. And those in blue have a reported use of less than 50, which kind of suggests no outdoor watering. 64% have a per capita demand of less than 100 gallons per capita day. So that's very good. So overall, 50% of public water systems could improve their resilience by adopting a conservation plan, and 21% of a very high per capita demand. That's low-hanging fruit for improving resilience. But I just wanted to go back to this. Those systems that use more than 200, and some of them use 350 gallons per minute. That means, gallons per day, per capita. That means there's a lot of outdoor watering. So with that increase, 20%, 30% increase in water for turf or trees or outdoor landscaping, that number is going to go up by 20%. And that's a stress on the water systems. So they want to be prepared for that. So just in summary, the take-home message from this work is that most systems are vulnerable to water supply shortages and infrastructure capacity issues that impact their resilience. But each public water system will have to drill down into their own details and examine their options for improving resilience. And we had initially tried to, I created a matrix where I could score all of them and have a final resilience score, but that was, I got some pushback on doing that we didn't want to shame people, but this is, we may try to make a tool where each public water system could evaluate their own resilience based on these different factors. We could pre-populate the data, and they could say, oh, no, that's not right. I actually have 3 wells, not 1, or whatever. We don't know if the data I used is right. Oops.
Amy, Joe Savage asked or commented that water loss within a community distribution system is also something that needs to be addressed, and reducing water loss should be a priority.
Yeah. Very good. And that, I think, comes out in the per capita demand number too. So thank you. So to build resilience, each public water system needs to understand how they are vulnerable, and then they can increase their resilience by using trying to find multiple sources of water, or at least not relying on just one well or one source. And they can strengthen their infrastructure capacity by acquiring additional wells, increasing their storage capacity, monitoring their water supply, etc. And then they also should look at how vulnerable they are to erosion and debris flows. And then they can increase their resilience by developing conservation plans. And that could include, that could include what Joe just said about leaking pipes. It could be like a conservation plan, not just for the customers, but for the whole utility. You know, are you doing leak detection on a monthly basis, or how often are you checking and repairing for leaks, looking for the unaccounted for water? Developing drought triggers. So, you know, I was familiar with that working for the city of Santa Fe. We had to put it in place, like, okay, when our reservoir is at this level, then we're in stage 1 drought. And then, you know, we'd escalate to stage 2, which meant, you know, 1 day a week watering, and then no outdoor watering. It depends. So each community needs to think about what's coming down the pike for them and how to be prepared. So I hope this is the end of my discussion. I wanted to say something about, there's so much funding with that infrastructure bill that was passed, the $50 billion that's going to states. So that's a whole nother thing. This is just evaluating resilience. So maybe I should stop sharing.
You can, and I freed up everybody. If you want to directly ask her a question, you can unmute yourself. I have a few questions. If I can just go ahead and start the process. So I'm you know, personally, I review Water Trust Board applications, and I think that the Water Trust Board could use this. You know, we don't want to shame them, but I think that, you know, people that show that they're less resilient, you know, that might score them higher for funding for Water Trust Board. That was my one thought. And then when you talked about water conservation plan and the Drinking Water Bureau, the OSC also has a water conservation plan. I sure hope that we're all utilizing the same water conservation plan and looking at it in the same fashion, you know, so that we, you know, because we have it as a requirement for if they're going to be requesting Water Trust Board money and they're a covered entity, it's in statute that they have to have this conservation plan in place. And then, so I don't know what Drinking Water Bureau's use of the water conservation plan is, but I'm hoping that they are this one and the same animal, and then just keep moving. I don't even expect answers on that. But I think that asset management should also be included in their infrastructure resiliency if they do have an asset management plan. If they don't, they would be dinged on that as well. And then adding in the USR to the system, and then age of well. Okay, and that's it.
That's great. Julie has her list of public water systems and whether they have a conservation plan, and it's that there were, I mean, I don't think she thought it was 100% complete of her understanding of who has one or not. Whereas the Drinking Water Bureau called every single one and they told us whether they had one. So that was why I used that data source.
That's fine. I was just, I didn't know whether Drinking Water Bureau had their own type of conservation plan that they use to assess, you know what I mean? I was just, because we don't ever meet, we don't ever talk to each other. So I was just curious, you know, if they're using the one that we're required by statute to collect, or if they have additional data or information. And Julie, you've got your hand up. I'll just let you talk.
And I would just say, Amy, that I would be careful with that. I guess if it was a survey or phone calls, because some systems think that they have a water conservation plan when they have an ordinance. So there's a big difference between an ordinance and a conservation plan. Anyways, at some point, I will share with you the most recent list that I have. It's pretty updated because we've gone through all our files and made sure that we have a comprehensive list of all conservation plans on file with our office. And then the second thing I was going to mention, oh my gosh, I think I lost my train of thought. Sorry. Maybe I'll pop back in here.
Asset management plans, or?
Oh no, source protection plans. Did you look at those?
I don't remember if I did or not. It seemed like what I think, Julie, what I recall is that you sent me, you sent me a few plans, but it wasn't, maybe there were 20 or 30 of them.
Right,
And-
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And NMED should have a list of entities that have source protection plans, because I think that's another thing that they may need for funding of Water Trust Board, but I'm not sure if you know that off the top of your head, Jerry.
I'm sorry, I was answering a question in chat. I didn't hear the question.
Oh, do you know if NMED has a list of source protection plans, or are those needed for Water Trust Board funding?
That would be really interesting to know. I teach at the New Mexico Rural Water Association. I give a class every 6 months, and as far as like the accuracy of both the surface area and the pod layer, I'm encouraging the systems to look at that data. It's available on Esri Open Data. And, Julie, I really don't know about the source protection thing, but it says SRF requires source water protection plans. SRF. NMED Drinking Water Bureau does have a list of surface protection. Okay, so they've got that. Thanks, guys. But
And
I don't.
Sorry, to get the location of the infrastructure, or are you wanting?
Yes,
because
because
another issue that's required.
The surface area and the pods, because you were saying that the pod layer is not very good. And so what we're doing is
sorry, not your pod layer. It's
no, Drinking Water Bureau. And I know which one you're talking about. I've seen them both. There's because I actually present this at the New Mexico Rural Water Association, but the GIS folks with Drinking Water Bureau and OSE have been meeting regularly because we want this information to not just stay the way it is. We want it to be corrected and progressing. And so there are some systems, as you said, that were not included. And then there's others that were we assumed based upon the parcel data. And so what we're doing is we're asking the systems to look at it, because there are some statutes and regulations within our agency that require them to file a service area map, especially with this regionalization bill. If it goes through, they will absolutely have to have a service area map, and it must be correct, because we can't be trumping on other people's service areas. And so we are the GIS Phil Polzer, and Daniel Estrada and Zach are meeting regularly on the service area maps, and we've created a red line layer that we will be asking the systems to give us corrections, and then we will then validate and yada 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 from there.
Great. So you have been working with the geodatabase that was created for Julie Valdez, and you have a corrected one, or?
Nope, what we are doing is we're creating Survey 123 that will allow the systems to go in and put in areas that they've either annexed or correct data that we have that they should say, no, it's not that far, and they can put in a new polygon, and then we can do some QA/QC. It's not a pretty process, but it's about the only way that we could figure out how to do this.
Definitely, that's great. Cool. So.
Anybody else have and Ramon, you had asked about access to a recording. I usually post our recording on a server because we don't have, I might be able to put it up on our YouTube channel if Amy's amenable to that. I can edit it down to just the presentation, and we can put it on our tutorial, our resiliency stuff. And, if that works for you.
That's fine with me.
Excellent. I'll get that up probably next week, Ramon. It'll take me a few days to get it edited and then get it posted. Joe asked if he could have a PDF version of your slides, and you're welcome, Ramon. And Amy, thank you very much.
I will, should I email that to you, Jerry, the PDF version?
Yes, and what I can do then is just send it out to all the participants. Or you can post it here if you have the PDF. You can post it in chat. I think you can.
I haven't made a PDF yet, but I can.
Okay, not a problem. Not a problem. We can take care of that after the meeting.
Okay.
Excellent.
Good. Well, thank you. I just want to go back to the source water protection plans, whether that is just a source of information for service areas and well locations, or is that a whole nother factor that causes vulnerability to climate change if wells are the water quality piece of if a well could be contaminated?
Ramon, could you unmute yourself perhaps? And
yeah, thank you so much for that, Jerry. So Amy, I think to the question that you were just asking, I think that source water protections plans would probably give us vulnerabilities at the local level that we might not see in other data that's out there.
Yeah. I'll have to look at some of those. Any other comments on, you shouldn't do that, or what about looking at this other source? Are there other factors you think? I know I went through this really fast. And by the way,
and just to let you know of another group that I'm in, if I've been working with both Emily and Michael with the Drinking Water Bureau and Liquid Waste Bureaus, and the OSE and the three agencies made a handout that we provide to the public water systems when they come in, because we have different construction needs and timing is always of the essence. And it really is disappointing when we have Water Trust Board money that is spent to drill a well that it does not meet Drinking Water Bureau standards, and they are not allowed to use it as a water supply well. That to me, as a taxpayer, as a water drinker, is very disheartening. And so we're trying to nip that in the bud and stop people from just running out and hiring a well driller because they have the permit and the funding. That they have to know that they have to hire an engineer, design the well that has to be approved prior to the well driller being selected. And so that is another mantra that I drone into people during my presentation with the Drinking Water Bureau. But I will only be able to attend 3 more Drinking Water Bureau CEUs, and then I'll be in retirement. And then beyond then, it will be up to you guys.
Okay. By the way, I'm also giving this presentation at the Rural Water User Conference in April, so where you said you will be talking. And there's also a draft report I wrote a year ago on this whole resilience assessment that's up on the water planning website at ISC. And I think Andrew Erdman would like comments on that.
Good afternoon, Jerry and Amy. Thank you so much for putting this presentation together and doing the presentation itself. I wanted to ask how this information might be shared with policymakers so that we can start to introduce legislation that might address some of the vulnerabilities that you've identified.
Andrew, do you want to answer that question?
Sure, I can try and do that. Sorry, I'm trying to mute the other thing here. So this information is going to be kind of there's a report that Amy's created that's a supporting document for the 50-year water plan. And there's a short summary of a lot of this information that's in the 50-year water plan. So we don't know exactly when that's going to get released because the governor's office is going to determine the schedule on that. Okay, I see Helen's comment. It seems like a crazy link. And once that gets released, it'll be out there to some extent. And that's really the intent, is to be able to try and drive some legislation with that. There are a couple things, because we did share this with the Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force. So some of the information that's related to this and the 50-year plan is reflected a little bit in their report also, which I will post in addition to a better link. I'll put a link to that as well as a better link to Amy's report in the chat.
Thanks, Andrew. Nat, you're next.
Thank you, Jerry. I mean, this is a great report and great work. And thank you, Amy. Jerry referenced earlier, just so folks heard, there's a bill that's actually, I think, on its way to the governor's desk that provides incentives for smaller drinking water providers to regionalize and consolidate. And as Amy's, statistical analysis showed, the problems are not limited. There's not a strong association between size and problems, but I think there's a pretty wide consensus that regionalization and consolidation will enable access to more resources to address some of these problems. And so that's something that the legislature, from what I've heard through the debates on that bill that Jerry was referencing, is really acutely tuned into. I don't think that they have the full understanding of the scope of the issue that Amy was laying out in terms of your watersheds are at risk. I mean, it's not just finding an operator who can operate your plant. It's a much bigger problem. But I think that bill is sort of the first step. And I think that there's just going to be a lot more that's going to be needed in coming years to meet this huge unmet need. So I wanted people to be aware of that. I think it's Senate Bill, is it 9? Or Jerry, do you remember the number of it? That's if people want to go and look.
I think it's Senate Bill 1, isn't it?
Senate Bill 1, excuse me. Yeah,
Senate
it was Senate Bill 1. It's passed both the House and the Senate, I believe. So the governor's going to be signing it. So that's one legislative thing that's already happened. But there's a lot more that'll need to happen.
That would be great. The scores would increase dramatically, for a lot of these systems that have only one well and they're right next to each other. It's like, guys, if you group together, then you have 2 wells. And right there, that score goes up.
Yeah, and there's, as I understood through listening to the debates, there's a lot of politics and territoriality with these systems. And so there needs to be a little bit of nudging to get them to consolidate. And that's, I think, where we're having to go.
Cool.
Thank you, Nat. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Yeah, it would be fun to do. Well, I couldn't do the whole scoring piece, but if we show the map, the whole, the overall score, and then if we let 50% of them regionalized, here's what the map looks like. It's much a better picture. Like, it would be a way to sell these ideas to policymakers and maybe to the individual water systems. They pay attention to how vulnerable they are and go, God, you're right. Really, we really should be all working together. So.
Amy, thank you for bringing us together, because we don't really do this enough. I do a common lunch and learn for our agency, but I never dreamed of, doing a lunch and learn for other agencies. And this has really been helpful on many, many, many platforms. So as I said, we will save this recording and get it up on our YouTube channel. And I just can't thank you enough, Amy.
Great. Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I welcome your continued comments. Just email me at, should I type my email address in there again, or?
Yes, if you could, into the chat, just so they don't have to go back up, that would be great. Julie, did you have another, or was that your hand going down?
No, I didn't. I was just trying to say clap for Amy and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank both of you, Amy and Jerry, for getting all this organized, and Amy for doing all this work, and Jerry for having these great events organized. So yeah, thanks so much.
And what was the link for? I'm sorry. Oh, it was the task force. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, the final report to the infrastructure task force is the link is posted in the chat. It's up on nmwater.org.
Great.
And engage nmwater.org also. That's the draft. What is that? The draft water plan?
Sorry, I should have labeled them. The first one, the engage NM that's Amy's draft report. And certainly if there's comments about that, please let me or Amy or all of us know. And the second one is for the water policy and infrastructure task force report, which includes a little bit of the stuff that builds from on what Amy's done. So yeah.
Thanks.
Just to say, there are actually 2 reports that I posted you guys put up a year ago. One is just on the water demand calculation and how we did that. And then the other one is the resilience assessment. So.
Fabuloso. Well, I'm going to stop recording. Thanks so much.
Okay, great. I did it in less than an hour. Whew.